name's Mark van Hoen. I'm an electronic music artist, and I've been making music for a very long time, 30 years or more maybe, and I'm here in Den Haag for the festival. I'm going to be playing tracks from my latest record, which came out earlier this year on Editions Mego, which is a label based in Austria, and along with the visuals that I made for each track. Always, yeah.
Always?
Yeah, I have been since 94. Yeah.
Well, what role did they have in?
Well, because I always felt that when this kind of style of music started to become fairly common, with live performance, I always felt it was a little boring to stand there and watch somebody press buttons and, or play with a mixer. And I thought it was quite a limited thing to watch, so I felt like I needed to add something visually so that it was more interesting and a different dimension for the audience. Well, it is a very complex mix of different artists and different genres, but and the borders have very much melted between different genres within electronic music and dance music and those related types. I feel like I have to just continue to try and I've always thought that electronic music and experimental music generally was about creating your own sonic world in a way, and I feel like still there's so much more to be done, and I've never really been one for sort of conforming to a genre and to try and be part of a scene. And I can see the appeal of that, and other people do it, and I admire the way some people do it, but it's something I've never really been attracted to. So I always try to kind of cut my own way, if you see what I mean. And I have many things I still want to do. And my influences, stretch right back to the 60s. And I generally admire people like current artists that also have that same approach, that they perhaps are not only influenced by music from recently, but across the decades. That's what appeals to me, because I like to hear that influence of electronic music from the last 40, maybe even 50 years coming in. In a way, yeah, because I do think that cassettes and vinyl seem more valuable than the disposability of digital formats, and for the most part they certainly sound better, because we're used to reducing the bit rates and the quality of the MP3s, and with cassette and vinyl you kind of seem to retain a certain quality. And I think that's what it's about. It is a reaction in a way, because it's sort of saying that it's something tangible that you hold, that you have as an object, and that it becomes more special because of that. And it's the actual ownership of the physical item that becomes important, and then the music in turn becomes more valuable, I believe. It's quite an important one, actually, I think, because if you have grown up in the sort of generation that I have, the media by which you listen to music becomes very, very important, because like I said about vinyl, the ownership of an object, that was a very special occasion, a very special event when I would buy a record. Say in the 70s or 80s, before the CDs were around, that it became something that you looked at and you valued highly, and I think that is missing a lot of the time, and the memory aspect of it I feel like that's, with digital media now, it's sort of disappeared in a way that music just becomes something you click a link on a computer and you hear it, and then it's over. Whereas the value of a piece of vinyl or even a cassette was just so much more potent. Well, I know what you mean about the difference between memory and nostalgia, and I think it's quite an important thing because, like you say, a lot of electronic music using analog synthesizers is very referential to the 80s, and it seems to have been that way for quite some time, almost to the point where, you know, in the past you would have cycles of, you know, the 70s would come back into fashion or the 60s would come back into fashion and so on. But it seemed like at the end of the 90s, the 80s came back into fashion, and it never went away. It's still with us now. And I don't know what it is about the 80s. It seemed to be the last decade in which things were kind of genuinely new, if you know what I mean. And that everything else after that was kind of postmodern and reinventing the past. So I wonder if maybe that's why that the 80s still remains with us as a revivalist thing. And I don't even know that, you know, younger people who were perhaps in their early 20s, they don't have nostalgia for the 80s because they weren't even born, you know. So it's not like a nostalgia thing. And it's a really difficult thing to define why that is, why it is that that decade seems to be so much with us still. It took me a long time to enjoy music that was influenced by the 80s because obviously I was a teenager in the 80s and I didn't like a lot of it actually. I liked the very early 80s music, but then the mid-80s for me was not a good time musically, and actually they don't, the music that's influenced by the 80s is not really from that middle 80s period, it's from the early 80s. The middle 80s period was sonically a very uninteresting time, I believe. Apart from things like hip hop and electro, which was a good thing, but mainstream music was not good at that time. So I think it's really important, the difference between memory and nostalgia, because it's like I said before, that electronic music has been around pretty much since probably the late 50s, 1958, 1960, and that when we listen to that music, or when I listen to that music now, it's not about nostalgia because I wasn't alive, but I hear the way in which people were inventing a new sonic world and a new language and a new way to listen to organised sounds and calling it music, even though even now people don't perhaps recognise it as music. And that's why it becomes about memory rather than nostalgia, because it's something about evoking a time and a place, and it's about something, and it makes you feel something about something specific. So it's not about, oh, do you remember when we listened to this music when we were doing that? You know, that's really not what it's about to me. Well, no, absolutely not. With Seafeel, I really feel like they, you know, reinvented themselves when they made the latest record. It doesn't sound anything like the music that they made very early on and that I was involved with. So that's admirable, and I think the Retromania thing, it is very difficult to cut through it because it seems that people want to, journalists and listeners want to gravitate towards this thing because they like to refer to the past. They like to say, oh, that sounds like that mixed with that, and that comes from that genre, and that's always been the case. People always want to label something. It's a cliche, but you know, it's true. They always want to label music and define it easily, and they find it very difficult when something is genuinely new and that and that it's inventing a new world, because they find it very difficult to then name drop and say put these references in, and they find it difficult to describe the music without a list of references to refer to. So, you know, I think, yeah, Simon Reynolds is probably right. You know, it is retromania, and that's a great shame. And I think that it would be nice if more people perhaps valued music that was new more. That they put that at the top and said, this is great because this is new, rather than kind of go, oh, I don't really understand that because I don't really know how to describe it, and that's a great shame. But, you know, on the other hand, it does happen, so, you know, I'm not trying to be cynical about it, but, you know, I wish there was more, and I wish there was more appreciation for people that make something new, yeah.
Last question. Where does, it's a question we ask for musicians, where does the music come from in the creative process? Like at which, how does it work?
Okay, well, for me, it's really about, if you, let's say the comparison with a classical musician, or say an Indian sitar player or a jazz player or something like that, they would have learnt their craft, their art, over a number of years, how to play the instrument. And so for them, actually, you know, forget the classical thing, because that's not what I mean, but I mean more about improvisational music, where somebody has learned a traditional instrument and they've spent many years doing that. And when they're performing music, they no longer have to think about the mechanics of playing. That's automatic, that's part of their existence in a way. And for me, it's the same, because, you know, I've been making electronic music for a long time. It's not something I'm thinking about technically. I'm not aware of that side of it. I just do it, and as such, it becomes a natural flow. So that anything I'm feeling in my life, anything that's going on, it can be immediately reflected in what I'm doing. So it's almost a subconscious process.